The teenager's voice cut across the memorial ceremony like a knife through silk. Look at that guy. Can barely stand still. Probably drunk. The laughter that followed rippled through his cluster of friends, heads turning, phones tilting to capture the moment. What none of them knew, what the smirking 17-year-old couldn't possibly understand, was that those trembling hands had once held a rifle steady enough to take impossible shots that saved 17 Marines in a firefight that officially never made it into any history book. The old man stood 3 rows back from the memorial wall, his frame rigid despite the tremors that ran through his weathered hands like aftershocks. He wore donated clothes, a flannel shirt 2 sizes too large, and work boots held together with careful stitches and stubborn hope. His posture told a different story than his appearance. Shoulders back, spine straight, feet positioned at precisely shoulder width. The kind of bearing that didn't come from YouTube videos or weekend warrior fantasies. The kind that got beaten into muscle memory through years of standing at attention until your legs went numb and your vision blurred. The memorial ceremony at Camp Pendleton stretched across the main parade ground under a California sun that showed no mercy. Rows of white folding chairs faced a granite wall etched with names. So many names, each one a promise broken, a future stolen, a family shattered. The Marine Honor Guard stood motionless near the wall, their dress blues pristine, their faces carved from stone. Somewhere a bugler was preparing to play taps. Soon, but not yet. Brendan Morrison sat in the 3rd row, his designer sneakers worth more than most of the attendees' entire wardrobes. His father, Colonel James Morrison, sat beside him in full dress uniform, medals gleaming, jaw set in the perpetual expression of command. The colonel had dragged his son to this ceremony every year since the boy turned 13. Character building, he called it. Brendan called it torture. 2 hours of standing and sitting and pretending to care about people who died before he was born. The old man's hands shook worse when he tried to hold them still. A visible tremor that ran from fingertips to wrists, making the dog tags beneath his shirt clink softly against each other. The sound was barely audible, but Brendan heard it. He always heard the things that annoyed him. Dudes tweaking, Brendan whispered to the friend on his left, loud enough for the rows around him to hear. Should have screening at these things. Keep the street people out. More laughter. More phones. More heads turning to see what the commotion was about. The old man didn't move, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the mockery that hung in the air like smoke. His eyes remained fixed on the wall, on one name in particular. Lance Corporal Raymond Chen. Kia. Fallujah. November 2004. The letters were worn smooth from years of fingertips tracing them. From hands that shook so badly now that sometimes it took 3 tries to button a shirt. Sergeant Major Elena Torres stood near the podium, coordinating the ceremony with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. She had done this for 11 years, knew every family, remembered every story. When she heard the laughter, her head snapped around. Her eyes found Brendan first, then followed his gaze to the old man standing alone. Something in the way he stood made her pause. She had been a Marine for 26 years, had served in 3 wars and more police actions than she cared to remember. You learn to read people, learn to see past the surface to the truth underneath. This man's clothes said homeless. His trembling hands said damaged. But his bearing, the way he held himself despite everything, that said warrior. Torres moved closer, weaving through the rows of chairs with practiced efficiency. She needed to see his face, needed to confirm the suspicion that was building in her chest like a storm. Brendan leaned back in his chair, confident in his father's protection, in his status as the colonel's son, in the immunity that came with privilege. He pulled out his phone, angled it toward the old man. Gonna go viral, he muttered. Homeless guy crashes Marine ceremony. His thumb hovered over the record button. The old man's right hand moved slowly to his chest, pressed against the fabric of his shirt, feeling for the metal underneath. The dog tags he hadn't removed in 48 years. The ones that had survived Fallujah and Ramadi and places that didn't have names on any map. The ones that had Ray Chin's blood still trapped in the microscopic grooves of the stamped letters. A program fell from someone's lap a few rows ahead. The old man's body reacted before his mind could stop it. His hand shot out, caught the falling paper midair with a precision that seemed impossible given the tremors. The movement was clean, economical, the kind of reflex that came from catching grenades before they hit the ground, from snatching magazines in the dark while rounds snapped overhead. Torres saw it happen, saw the impossible speed, saw the military efficiency in a movement that should have been awkward. Her breath caught. She knew that reflex, had seen it in the best of the best, in the operators who moved through the world like ghosts, in the men who came back different, changed, carrying weight that never showed on any scale. The ceremony was beginning. A general stepped to the podium, his voice amplified across the parade ground. We gather here today to honor the fallen, to remember their sacrifice, to ensure that their names, their stories, their courage never fades from memory. Brendan's phone was still out, still recording, still pointed at the old man who stood motionless now, hands clasped in front of him, tremors barely controlled. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, if stories of hidden heroes and quiet sacrifice speak to you, you might recognize something in your own community. You might walk past someone every day whose humble appearance conceals an extraordinary past. Drop a comment telling us where you're joining us from. Sometimes the greatest warriors aren't the ones still in uniform. Torres reached the old man's row, close enough now to see the details. The way his eyes never left the wall. The way his lips moved silently, forming words that only he and the dead could hear. The faded tattoo barely visible at his collar. Coordinates, a date, and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. She had seen that tattoo before, in a photograph, on a wall, in a Force Recon Ready room at Camp Pendleton where legends were remembered and heroes were made. The general's voice continued. Some gave their lives in a single moment of heroism. Others gave pieces of themselves over years of service. All deserve our remembrance. All deserve our respect. Brendan whispered something else, something cruel, something about shaking hands and competence. His friends laughed again. The old man's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough for Torres to see the muscle jump beneath weathered skin. But he didn't turn, didn't respond, didn't break the discipline that had been forged in him so long ago that had become bone deep. What Brendan Morrison didn't know, what his father the colonel was about to discover, what would change everything in the next 17 minutes, was that the man he was mocking had earned the Medal of Honor in combat so brutal that 3 Marine generals had personally attended the classified ceremony. That those shaking hands had killed 47 enemy fighters in a 6-hour battle that saved an entire platoon from annihilation. That the tremors were from shrapnel that had severed nerves in both hands, damage sustained while refusing evacuation until every last Marine was safely out. The boy was still laughing, still recording, still completely unaware that he was about to receive an education in respect that would haunt him for the rest of his life. William Chun had arrived at the memorial wall at 05:30, same as every November 14th for the past 20 years. The sun hadn't been up yet. The base had been quiet except for the sound of boots on pavement and distant commands from the morning PT formations. He had walked the 12 miles from the VA shelter in Oceanside, his legs moving on autopilot, his mind already in that place between past and present where memory lived like a second skin. He always sat on the same bench, third from the left, facing the wall, close enough to read the names without his failing eyesight betraying him. His hands had been steadier in the early morning cold. Always were. Something about the temperature kept the tremors manageable. By noon they would be worse. By evening, impossible. The photograph lived in his left breast pocket, protected by a Ziploc bag that he replaced every month with religious precision. 8 faces. His recon team. Fallujah, October 2004. 1 month before everything changed. Before Ray joined them. Before the house on Route Michigan. Before the world caught fire and took pieces of all of them that would never grow back. Only 2 faces in that photograph were still breathing. William Chun and Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. Last he heard living in Montana, teaching survival skills to at-risk youth. The other 6 were on the wall, their names etched in granite that would outlast memory, outlast grief, outlast everything except the weight that pressed down on the chests of the men who survived them. Raymond Chin's name was on the second panel from the right, 4th row from the bottom. William knew this the way some people knew prayers. The way his hands knew how to field strip an M4 in the dark, even though he hadn't touched one in 18 years. The way his body knew to drop flat at the sound of backfiring engines, even though his mind knew he was safe, knew he was home, knew the war was over. Ray had been 19 when he died, barely old enough to buy cigarettes legally, not old enough to rent a car or buy beer or do any of the 1,000 mundane things that people took for granted, but old enough to sign his name on the dotted line, old enough to ship out, old enough to die in a country that most Americans couldn't find on a map. William's sister had begged him, "Please, watch over him. Keep him safe. Promise me." Her voice had been desperate, her hands gripping his forearms hard enough to leave bruises. Ray had idolized his uncle since childhood, had enlisted because William had served, had requested force recon because that was what his uncle had done, had wanted to be just like the man who wore the medals and the ribbons and the quiet pride of service completed. William had promised, had meant it, had believed he could do it. He traced Ray's name with shaking fingers. The letters were cool beneath his touch despite the California sun. Raymond. Chun. The stone was worn smooth here. 20 years of fingertips. 20 years of grief compressed into granite. "I'm still here, brother," William whispered. The words came out hoarse and used. He didn't speak much anymore. Didn't have anyone to speak to. Still trying. The memorial ceremony wouldn't start for another 6 hours. But William needed this time. Needed the quiet. Needed to sit with the names and the memories and the weight of promises broken. Other families would arrive later. Other veterans. Other survivors carrying their own dead on their backs like rucksacks that could never be set down. He pulled the photograph from his pocket, held it in trembling hands. 8 young faces staring back at him across 2 decades. They'd been gods once. Invincible. Unstoppable. The best of the best of the best. Force recon operators who could move through hostile territory like smoke. Who could call in airstrikes with surgical precision. Who could fight for days without sleep, without food, without anything except each other and the mission and the absolute certainty that they were the tip of the spear. Danny Martinez. Kia Fallujah, November 2004. Sniper round through the temple. Dead before he hit the ground. Kevin Foster. Kia Ramadi, January 2005. IED on Route Michigan. Nothing left to send home except dog tags and a flag. Ray Chun. Kia Fallujah, November 2004. RPG through a window they had cleared 3 times. Bled out in William's arms while William screamed for a corpsman who couldn't get through the fire. The others followed in the months after. Some in combat. Some from wounds that took longer to kill. Some from invisible injuries that the VA couldn't treat and the politicians couldn't see and the civilians couldn't understand. William had outlived them all. Had survived when better men died. Had carried their memories like shrapnel embedded too deep to remove. The guilt was worse than the physical pain. Worse than the tremors. Worse than the nightmares that came every time he closed his eyes. He should have seen the shooter. Should have cleared that window one more time. Should have been faster, smarter, better. Should have kept the promise he made to his sister. The sun climbed higher. Other people began to arrive. Families in their Sunday best. Veterans in pressed uniforms or old unit T-shirts. Active duty Marines in their camouflage utilities paying respects during their lunch break. The memorial grounds slowly filled with the living come to honor the dead. William stayed on his bench. Stayed silent. Watched the preparations begin. The honor guard taking their positions. The speakers being tested. The chairs being arranged in precise rows. Everything done with military efficiency. Everything perfect. Everything except the holes that could never be filled. Brendan Morrison arrived with his father at 0900. William noticed them immediately. You learn to notice threats. Learn to catalog dangers. Learn to watch the people who moved with entitlement, with the assumption that the world would bend to accommodate them. The boy walked like someone who had never been told no, never faced consequences, never learned that actions had costs that couldn't be paid with money or connections or family name. The colonel was different. William recognized the bearing, the way he moved through space with purpose, the way other Marines straightened unconsciously when he passed. Command presence wasn't something you could fake. Either you had it or you didn't. Colonel Morrison had it, but he was distracted, greeting dignitaries, shaking hands, playing politics, not watching his son, not seeing the contempt in the boy's eyes as he looked at the memorial, at the names, at the veterans gathering to remember. William turned back to the wall, to Ray's name, to the promise that haunted him more than any ghost. Your mom asks about you every time I visit, William whispered. Says she sees you in her dreams. Says you're telling her you're okay, that you're not angry. I don't know if that's true or if it's just what mothers tell themselves to survive. His hand shook worse now, the tremors building as they always did. By the ceremony's start, they would be violent, uncontrollable, visible to everyone. He had learned to live with the stares, the assumptions, the whispers that followed him through grocery stores and gas stations and anywhere people gathered. Drunk, addict, mentally ill, dangerous, pathetic. No one looked at shaking hands and thought hero. No one saw the tremors and imagined the Medal of Honor ceremony where 3 generals had stood at attention while the citation was read, where the president's representative had placed the ribbon around his neck while William stood frozen, thinking only of the men who deserved it more, the men whose names were already being carved into walls like this one. The photograph went back in his pocket, protected, sacred, the only thing he owned that mattered. Soon the ceremony would begin. Soon Brendan Morrison's voice would cut across the memorial grounds with mockery sharp enough to draw blood. Soon everything would change in ways that William couldn't predict and Brendan couldn't imagine. But for now, in these last moments of quiet, William Shun sat on his bench and whispered to the dead and tried to keep breathing despite the weight on his chest that grew heavier with each passing year. The general's opening remarks ended, and the first family approached the wall. A widow, elderly now, her hands placing flowers beneath a name etched 40 years ago. Vietnam, a different war, same grief. The crowd watched in respectful silence. Even Brendan had the decency to stop scrolling through his phone for 60 seconds. William Chun stood 3 rows back, hands clasped in front of him to minimize the visible tremors. The muscles in his forearms ached from the constant tension, from trying to hold still, from fighting his own nervous system's betrayal. The shrapnel had done its work well. The surgeons at Landstuhl had been honest. The damage was permanent. The tremors would get worse with age. There was nothing they could do except manage the pain and hope the rest of his body held together better than his hands. Brendan's whisper carried across the rows like poison gas. Think security would actually remove him if I complained? His friend snickered. The boy's confidence had grown since his father arrived. Colonel Morrison's presence was a shield, a license to be cruel without consequences. Sergeant Major Torres had positioned herself 2 rows behind William, close enough to observe, close enough to intervene if necessary. Her eyes tracked every movement, every unconscious habit, the way William's weight distributed evenly on both feet, the way his breathing remained controlled despite the mockery, the way his eyes never left the wall, even when insults landed like mortar rounds. She had seen a tattoo clearly now. Coordinates 33.315 gradi N, 44.361 gradi e Fallujah, and a date, 111420004. 20 years ago today, the anniversary of whatever had happened in that city of blood and fire and shattered promises. The anniversary of whatever had put those tremors in his hands and that weight in his eyes. Another family stepped forward. A younger couple, their daughter barely walking, placing a teddy bear beneath a name. The Marine had been 22 when he died in Helmand Province. Would never see his daughter grow up. Would never teach her to ride a bike or drive a car or walk down an aisle. The widow's tears were silent, dignified, The kind of grief that had learned to live quietly inside the chest cavity where no one could see it bleed. Brendan yawned, checked his watch, shifted in his seat like a child forced to sit through church. His father stood near the podium speaking with a visiting congressman. Both men's uniforms were immaculate. Both men's ribbons told stories of service and sacrifice. But they were busy, important, not watching the boy who wore their protection like armor. William's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough for Torres to notice the muscle jump beneath weathered skin. She had seen that look before, in operators who were deciding whether to engage or withdraw, whether to stand their ground or fade into the shadows, whether the mission was worth the cost. Someone behind Brendan muttered something about respect, about remembering why they were here. The boy turned, face flushed, ready with a retort. But the speaker was a gunnery sergeant, 30 years in, ribbons from 3 wars decorating his chest. Even Brendan knew better than to engage. The boy turned back around, sullen now, embarrassed. The ceremony continued. More names, more flowers, more families carrying grief like rucksacks that never got lighter no matter how many miles they walked. The Marine Corps hymn played from speakers positioned around the memorial. The familiar notes carried across the parade ground, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, words that had been sung by men who bled and died and came home broken. William's lips moved silently, singing along, muscle memory from 1,000 formations, from boot camp and officer candidate school and force recon training, from nights huddled in Fallujah, safe, houses waiting for dawn and hoping the rockets would miss. From memorial services just like this one, where he stood at attention while better men were honored. Torres watched his lips, watched the words form, watched the way his entire body responded to the music like a tuning fork struck just right. This was no weekend warrior, no poser wearing surplus store clothes and claiming service he never earned. This was the real thing. She would bet her pension on it. Brendan pulled out his phone again, angled it toward William. Got the shaking hands in frame. Started recording. His thumb moved across the screen, adding text. Caption this, he typed. Suggestions welcome. His friends leaned in, offering commentary. Each suggestion crueler than the last. A program slipped from an elderly veteran's lap 2 rows ahead. William's hand shot out, caught it mid-fall with precision that seemed impossible given the tremors. The movement was clean, efficient, no guastimotion. The kind of reflex that came from thousands of repetitions, from training so ingrained it bypassed conscious thought entirely. The veteran turned, surprised. Thank you, son. His voice was rough with age and cigarettes and decades of shouting commands across parade grounds. William handed back the program. His hand was shaking badly now, but the transfer was smooth, controlled. Sir, he said, just the one word. Respectful. Automatic. The veteran studied William's face for a moment, saw something there, some recognition of shared experience, of brotherhood earned through blood and mud and fear. He nodded once, slowly, then turned back to face the memorial. Torres saw the whole interaction, saw the respect given and received, saw the way William's posture shifted when addressed directly, not quite coming to attention, but close. The body remembering what the mind tried to forget. She moved closer, navigating between the rows of chairs with practiced efficiency. She needed to see his hands up close, needed to confirm what she suspected about those scars barely visible beneath the tremors, about the calluses that spoke of years holding weapons, about the specific pattern of damage that came from very particular kinds of combat. Brendan's voice rose again. Seriously, though, why let homeless people crash these things? It's disrespectful to actual veterans. His friends nodded agreement, enabled his cruelty with their silence and their laughter and their shared contempt for anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of worthy. An active duty corporal in the row behind them stood abruptly. Excuse me. His voice was quiet but carried enough edge to cut. That man has every right to be here. More than you do. The corporal's eyes were hard. Young face, old eyes, the kind that had seen too much too soon. Brendan turned, ready to argue. ready to hide behind his father's rank. But the corporal was already walking away, moving toward the memorial wall, toward his own dead, toward names that haunted him in ways Brendan couldn't begin to comprehend. The confrontation had drawn attention. Heads turning, people noticing. Sergeant Major Torres accelerated her approach. She needed to reach William before this escalated, before the boy's father became aware, before decisions were made that couldn't be unmade. William stood motionless, eyes still fixed on Ray's name, hands still shaking, breathing still controlled. The insults washed over him like rain off stone. He had endured worse, had survived things that would break most men, had learned that dignity wasn't the absence of assault, but the refusal to let assault change who you were. Torres reached his row, stood beside him, close enough to see the details now. The dog tags visible beneath his collar. The name, Chun, William R. The service number, the blood type, O positive. The same blood type that had poured out of Ray's body faster than William could stanch it, faster than the corpseman could reach them, faster than God could answer prayers screamed through smoke and fire and the sound of men dying. The tattoo was clearer now. Not just coordinates and a date. Names too. Initials. DMKF-RC. Others. A memorial carried on skin. A wall that traveled with him wherever he went. The dead etched into flesh the way granite held their names here. Ma'am, William said quietly, not looking at her, not breaking his focus on the wall, just acknowledging her presence with the same automatic respect he had shown the elderly veteran. Torres felt her throat tighten. She had been right. Everything about him screamed operator. Everything except the clothes and the tremors and the way civilians looked at him and saw only damage. Brendan was watching them now, watching Torres approach the homeless man. Probably thinks he's getting kicked out, Brendan muttered to his friends. Filming it for the content, for the likes, for the validation that came from strangers on the internet finding entertainment in another human being's humiliation. What Brendan didn't know was that Torres had just recognized the specific coordinates on William's tattoo, had studied that operation in her advanced leadership course, had written a paper on the tactical decisions made during what military historians called the miracle of Route Michigan, had analyzed the actions of one force recon operator who held a position alone for 6 hours against overwhelming enemy forces while his team evacuated casualties. The operator's name had been redacted in the after-action reports. Classified, protected, but the call sign was legend. Steady. They had called him Steady because his hands never shook under fire, because he could take impossible shots in impossible conditions, because when everyone else was falling apart, he remained calm, cold, precise. Torres looked at William's trembling hands, at the scars barely visible through the weathering of age and homelessness, at the man who stood like a soldier and endured mockery like a saint. "Oh my God," she whispered. The words escaped before she could stop them. William's eyes finally moved, finally met hers, and in that moment Torres saw everything. Saw the weight, saw the guilt, saw the cost of survival when better men died, saw the hero hiding inside the broken shell of a man society had discarded. "Steady," she breathed. The call sign fell from her lips like a prayer. November 14th, 2004. Fallujah. The house on Route Michigan had been cleared twice already. William remembered every detail with the clarity that came from trauma burned into neural pathways like scars. The kind of memory that didn't fade with time. That grew sharper, more vivid, more inescapable. They had moved through the city for 6 days. House to house, room to room, stairwell to stairwell. The kind of fighting that turned boys into old men and old men into ghosts. Force Recon didn't usually do urban combat. They were supposed to be the eyes and ears, the intelligence gatherers, the silent professionals who moved through enemy territory like smoke and called in the big guns from safety. But Fallujah needed every trigger puller, needed every trained operator, needed bodies to clear buildings that insurgents defended with the desperation of men who knew they were already dead. So Force Recon went into the grinder with everyone else. Rachel had been with them for 3 weeks. Fresh from training. 20 years younger than William, but carrying the same last name and the same stubborn pride that ran in their family like a genetic marker. The kid was good. Fast lerner. Kept his head down. Followed orders. Everything you wanted in a new guy. William had promised to keep him safe. Had promised his sister. Had meant it with every fiber of his being. Had believed he could do it through sheer force of will and 20 years of combat experience and the protective instinct that came from being the older generation watching the younger one walk into the same hell. The house was 3 stories. Concrete and rebar. Windows blown out from previous airstrikes. Walls pockmarked with bullet holes like smallpox scars. They had cleared it that morning. Then again after lunch when reports came of insurgent movement. Both times it had been empty. Abandoned. Just another hollow shell in a city full of them. The third time was different. Danny Martinez had been point. Best close-quarters fighter William had ever seen. Could clear a room in 3 seconds flat. 2 shots, center mass, moving to the next threat before the first body hit the ground. Danny went through the door first, because that's what point men did. Because someone had to be first. Because the mission required it. The RPG came from a window on the 2nd floor. A window they had cleared personally. A window William had looked through with his own eyes and seen nothing but empty space and broken furniture and the smell of cordial and death that permeated everything in that cursed city. The shooter must have climbed back in after they passed. Must have been hiding in the walls or the ceiling or some spider hole they missed. Must have waited with the patience of a man willing to die if he could take Americans with him. The grenade hit Danny's center mass. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Shrapnel spread like a shotgun blast. Danny went down without a sound, just crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Ray was right behind him, took shrapnel to the legs and chest, started screaming immediately. William's world narrowed to a pinpoint. Training took over. Training and instinct and the cold calculation that turned operators into machines when the bullets started flying. He returned fire toward the window, dropped the shooter with 3 rounds. Center mass. The body fell forward, hung halfway out the window like a broken doll. But there were more. Always more. Muzzle flashes from windows across the street. From rooftops. From doorways. The entire block had been a trap. They had walked into an ambush set by men who knew exactly how Americans cleared buildings, who had studied their tactics, who had waited for the perfect moment to spring it. Kevin Foster was on the radio calling for backup, for medevac, for anything. His voice was calm, professional, the kind of calm that came from accepting you might die and deciding to do your job anyway. William dragged Ray behind cover, behind a half-collapsed wall that wouldn't stop bullets, but at least concealed them from direct fire. Ray's eyes were wide, panicked, the kind of fear that came from knowing you were hurt bad and help was far away and the enemy was close. His hands clutched at William's vest. "Uncle." The word came out wet, bubbling, blood in the lungs, blood everywhere. "You're okay," William lied. The words came automatically. The same lie told to dying men in every war since humans invented ways to kill each other. "You're going to be fine. Corpseman is coming. Just breathe. Stay with me." But Ray's femoral artery was severed. William could see it, could see the blood pumping out in rhythmic spurts that matched the kid's racing heartbeat, could see death approaching with mathematical certainty. 90 seconds, maybe less. No tourniquet would reach high enough. No pressure would stop bleeding from that location. Ray was dead. He just didn't know it yet. William tried anyway, pressed his hands against the wound, felt his nephew's blood pour over his fingers. Slick, unstoppable. The same blood that ran in William's veins. The same blood that connected them back through generations. The same blood that was supposed to keep flowing for decades more. For wedding days and grandchildren and quiet evenings telling stories about the war they survived together. Ray's hand found William's arm. Gripped it. "Not your fault." The words came out in gasps. Each one costing him. Each one proof that he was still human, still thinking, still trying to ease someone else's pain, even as his own life drained away. "Promise me. Tell Mom. Tell her I wasn't scared." Another lie. But William nodded. "I promise." The kid died 47 seconds later. His grip loosened. His eyes went distant. The light left them like water draining from a sink. One moment there was a person. The next moment there was meat. The transformation was instant and complete, and more horrible than anything William had seen in 20 years of war. The enemy fire intensified. Kevin went down, shrapnel to the shoulder. The corpsman who tried to reach them took a round through the neck. Bled out in the street. The ambush was perfect, complete. They were pinned, surrounded, cut off from support. William laid Ray's body down gently, closed the kid's eyes, said a prayer he didn't believe in because it was what you did, because ritual mattered when nothing else made sense. Then he picked up his rifle and went to work. The house with the shooters had 3 windows facing their position. William had a Barrett M82 sniper rifle, 50 caliber, the kind of weapon that could punch through concrete and body armor and any illusion of safety the enemy might have. He set up behind cover, controlled his breathing, let his hands find that perfect stillness that had earned him his call sign. Steady. They called him Steady because when everyone else was shaking, when the world was falling apart, when death was close enough to smell, his hands remained absolutely motionless. The tremors that would plague him later didn't exist yet. Wouldn't exist for another 3 hours. Not until the shrapnel found him. Not until his body betrayed him the way he had betrayed Ray. He worked methodically. 1 window, 1 target, 1 shot. Reload. Next window. Next target. Next shot. The Barrett's recoil was punishing. Each shot slammed into his shoulder like a hammer. But the gun didn't care. The mission didn't care. The enemy didn't care. So William didn't care either. 47 confirmed kills over 6 hours. That was what the after-action report would say. 47 enemy fighters eliminated by a single operator while his team evacuated casualties. The Medal of Honor citation would describe it as extraordinary valor, as heroism beyond the call of duty, as actions that saved 17 Marines who would have died if he hadn't held that position. But William would remember it differently. Would remember Ray's blood on his hands. Would remember the promise he broke. Would remember that he survived when better men died. That his hands stayed steady when it mattered for the mission, but not when it mattered for his nephew. The shrapnel hit him during hour 4. Mortar round, close enough to spray his position with metal fragments moving faster than sound. Both hands shredded, nerves severed, blood mixing with Ray's blood already dried on his skin. The pain was distant, abstract. His mind had shut down everything except the mission, except the rifle, except the mechanical process of acquiring targets and eliminating threats. He kept firing, kept working the bolt with hands that no longer had feeling, kept killing until the air support finally arrived, until the street was secure, until medevac could land, until he had done everything possible to save the men who were still alive. They pulled him out unconscious. Blood loss, shock, exposure. The surgeons at Landstuhl saved his hands, saved his life, but they couldn't save the nerves, couldn't stop the tremors that would start as soon as the damaged tissue began trying to heal. Couldn't fix what that day had broken inside him. 20 years later, standing at a memorial with those same hands shaking uncontrollably, William Chun could still feel Ray's blood, could still hear the kid's last words, could still see the moment the light left his eyes. The memory lived in his bones, in his scars, in the tremors that marked him as broken to everyone who saw him. Not your fault, Ray had said, but Ray had been wrong. It was absolutely his fault. He should have cleared that window again, should have been more careful, should have kept his promise to protect the kid, should have died instead. The guilt was heavier than any rucksack, more permanent than any tattoo, more painful than any wound. And unlike the physical scars, it would never heal. Sergeant Major Torres stood frozen beside William Chun, the call sign still hanging in the air between them like smoke. Steady, the legend. The operator whose actions at Fallujah were studied in every advanced tactics course. The man who had held an impossible position for 6 hours while wounded. The ghost who had disappeared from service 20 years ago and vanished into obscurity. And here he stood, shaking hands, donated clothes, invisible to everyone except those who knew what to look for. William's eyes met hers briefly. A warning flashed across his weathered features. Please don't. The unspoken plea was clear. He didn't want recognition, didn't want attention, wanted only to stand at this wall and remember his dead in peace. But Torres couldn't let it go. Her hand moved unconsciously toward her phone, toward the camera that could document this, toward the proof that would validate what she knew. She stopped herself, forced her hand back to her side. This wasn't her story to tell, wasn't her moment to claim. Colonel Morrison was making his way through the crowd now, shaking hands with veterans, thanking families for their sacrifice, playing his role as base commander with practiced efficiency. He hadn't noticed his son yet, hadn't seen the phone recording, hadn't heard the mockery that had rippled through the memorial service like poison. Brendan saw his father approaching and sat up straighter, put the phone away, arranged his face into something approximating respect. The transformation was instant, practiced, the kind of deception that came from years of hiding true nature behind acceptable masks. Torres made a decision, moved quickly through the rows of chairs toward the colonel. She needed to intercept him, needed to explain what she suspected before this situation escalated beyond control, before Brendan's cruelty forced a confrontation that would embarrass everyone involved. Colonel Morrison saw her approaching. Sergeant Major. His voice carried the easy authority of command. Everything running smoothly? Torres kept her voice low, respectful. Sir, may I speak with you privately for a moment? It's important. The colonel's expression shifted, reading her tone, her body language, the urgency beneath the professional courtesy. Of course. He excused himself from the congressman and followed Torres to the edge of the crowd. What's the situation? Torres chose her words carefully. Sir, there's a veteran here. Older gentleman, 3 rows back from the wall. Your son has been. The pause was deliberate. Making comments. Morrison's jaw tightened. What kind of comments? Mocking his appearance, sir. The man has a tremor, visible shaking in his hands. Your son has been filming him, making jokes about him being drunk or homeless. Other attendees have noticed. The colonel's face darkened. He turned, scanning the crowd, found Brendan easily, saw the boy's careful composure, the innocent expression, the lie written across features that looked so much like Morrison's own. I'll handle my son. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Sir, Torres hesitated. There's more. I believe I know who the veteran is. I recognize his tattoo, the coordinates and date. I've studied the operation. Morrison's attention sharpened. Go on. Fallujah, November 2004. Route Michigan. The after-action reports called it the miracle of Route Michigan. One force recon operator held a position for 6 hours, eliminated 47 enemy combatants while wounded, saved 17 Marines, earned the Medal of Honor in a classified ceremony. The colonel's expression changed, shifted from irritation at his son to something else, something closer to shock. You're certain? The tattoo matches the coordinates exactly, sir. The date, the unit insignia I glimpsed. And there's more. His bearing, the way he moves, the way he responded when addressed. Everything about him screams operator. Everything except the circumstances he's in now. Morrison looked back toward William, studied the figure standing motionless before the wall, saw what Torres had seen, the military precision hidden beneath poverty, the warrior concealed inside the homeless shell. My God, his call sign was steady, sir. Torres watched the colonel's face as recognition hit. I wrote a paper on that operation in my leadership course. The tactical decisions, the sacrifice. It's textbook material now. They use it to teach fire team dynamics under extreme stress. And my son has been mocking him. Morrison's voice was flat, cold, the kind of anger that came from shame, from realizing your child had failed to learn the lessons you tried to teach, had become exactly the kind of person you despised. Yes, sir. The colonel closed his eyes briefly, composing himself. When he opened them again, the base commander was gone. Only the father remained, angry, disappointed, determined to correct a mistake before it became permanent. Where is he now? Still at the wall, sir. He hasn't moved despite the harassment. Torres paused. Sir, he seems to want to avoid attention. When I said his call sign, he looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Whatever happened after Fallujah, whatever brought him to this point, I don't think he wants recognition. That may be. Morrison's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. But he's going to get it anyway. Because my son needs to learn what respect actually means. And every person at this ceremony deserves to know there's a Medal of Honor recipient standing among them. Torres felt her chest tighten. Sir, with respect, perhaps we should ask him first. Let him decide if he wants this. Morrison considered this. Nodded slowly. You're right. Protocol matters. Dignity matters. He's earned the right to choose. The colonel started walking toward William. Torres followed. Brendan noticed his father's approach. Saw the expression on Morrison's face. The boy's confidence wavered. Something was wrong. His father's anger was palpable even from a distance. Brendan's friends noticed too. Started to scatter. Started to distance themselves from whatever was coming. William saw them approaching as well. His shoulders tensed. Just slightly. The only visible sign of stress. His hand shook worse. The tremors intensifying with anxiety. With the knowledge that his anonymity was about to be stripped away. That the protective obscurity of homelessness was failing. Colonel Morrison stopped 3 feet away. Close enough to speak quietly. Far enough to respect personal space. The kind of distance that acknowledged rank and service and brotherhood. Sir, the word was heavy with meaning. Weighted with respect that transcended their current circumstances. William's response was automatic. Muscle memory from decades of service. Colonel. His voice was hoarse from disuse. Quiet, but clear. The tremors didn't touch his voice. Only his hands. Only the parts of him that had been broken by shrapnel and guilt and 20 years of carrying dead men on his back. Morrison's eyes moved to the tattoo barely visible at William's collar. To the coordinates. To the date. To the initials etched into skin. My sergeant major tells me you serve in Fallujah. Yes, sir. En route, Michigan. November 14th, 2004. William's jaw tightened. The muscle jumped beneath weathered skin. Yes, sir. Morrison took a breath. Let me be direct. Are you the operator they called Steady? The one who held the position at the house? Who saved the extraction team? The silence stretched. William's eyes moved to Torres. Back to Morrison. To the crowd gathering behind them. To Brendan watching with dawning horror. To the wall where Ray's name was etched. To all the witnesses who would see him. Would know him. Would strip away the protective anonymity that let him grieve in peace. Sir, William said finally, with respect, I prefer not to discuss my service. I'm just here to pay respects to my nephew, to the men I serve with. I don't want attention. Morrison nodded, understanding. I respect that. I do. But my son has been disrespectful, has been mocking you, filming you, making jokes about your hands and your appearance. He paused. And I think he needs to understand exactly who he was mocking. What you sacrificed. What those tremors actually represent. William's eyes found Brendan. Held the boy's gaze for a long moment. Brendan looked away first. Shame or fear or some combination flooding his privileged features. The phone was gone now. Hidden. But the damage was done. The cruelty had been witnessed. Recorded in memory, if not on camera. Colonel, William said quietly. Your son is young, foolish, but not beyond teaching. You don't need to humiliate him publicly to make your point. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Respect in his eyes. Perhaps. But some lessons need witnesses. Need weight. Need to be burned into memory, so they can't be forgotten or dismissed. He turned to Torres. Sergeant Major, would you please retrieve the Medal of Honor citation from the memorial office? It's public record. Operation Route Michigan, November 2004. Torres hesitated, looked at William, saw the resignation in his eyes, the acceptance that this was happening whether he wanted it or not. Yes, sir. She moved toward the memorial building at a brisk walk. William's hand shook worse now, trembling visibly, violently, the stress triggering the damaged nerves, making the tremors impossible to hide or minimize. He clasped them together, squeezed until the knuckles went white, trying to hold still, trying to maintain some dignity while his body betrayed him. Brendan stood slowly, walked toward his father on unsteady legs. Dad, I didn't know. I'm sorry. The words came out rushed. Desperate. The privileged boy, realizing that consequences were arriving, that his father's protection had limits, that he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Morrison didn't look at his son, kept his eyes on William, on the man who stood with quiet dignity despite everything. You will be. But first, you're going to learn exactly what those shaking hands accomplished, what they cost, and why they deserve more respect than you've shown in your entire 17 years. The crowd had begun to notice. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The gathering of mourners and veterans and families slowly reoriented toward the developing confrontation. Something was happening, something that felt significant even to those who didn't understand the context yet. William Chun wanted to disappear, wanted to fade back into the obscurity that had protected him for 2 decades, wanted to return to his bench and his quiet communion with the dead without all these eyes witnessing his exposure. But he stood his ground, maintained the discipline that had been beaten into him through boot camp and officer training and countless operations where retreat meant death. If this was happening, he would face it standing. Brendan Morrison stood beside his father now, close enough to feel the colonel's anger radiating like heat from a furnace. The boy's earlier confidence had evaporated completely. His friends had scattered. His phone was buried deep in his pocket. His face had gone pale beneath his expensive haircut and designer clothes. The protection he had always assumed would be there, the immunity that came from being the colonel's son, had failed him at the moment he needed it most. Sergeant Major Torres emerged from the memorial office at a near run. In her hands was a folder. Inside that folder was a document that would change everything. She reached Colonel Morrison and handed it over without a word. Her eyes met William's. An apology lived in that glance, a recognition that she had set events in motion that couldn't be stopped now. Morrison opened the folder, scanned the contents quickly. His expression hardened, then softened, then settled into something that looked like mixed with fury. He looked up at William. I'm going to have my son read this aloud, in front of everyone here. Is that acceptable to you? William's jaw worked, the muscles in his face tight with tension, the tremors in his hands spreading to his arms now, to his shoulders. The stress was overwhelming his nervous system's ability to compensate. Sir, he said quietly, you're the ranking officer. You do what you think is right. But I'm asking you, please don't do this for me. Do it for the lesson, not for the spectacle. Morrison nodded. Understood. He turned to his son. Brendan, take this. Read it. Every word. Loud enough for everyone to hear. And understand that when you were mocking this man's hands, you were mocking wounds earned saving 17 Marines who would have died without him. Brendan took the folder with shaking hands. His tremors were different from William's. Fear, shame, the realization of magnitude. He opened the folder, saw the official seal, the formal language, the weight of military bureaucracy turned toward documenting extraordinary valor. His eyes widened as he began to process what he was reading. Dad, I can't. The words came out barely above a whisper. You can and you will. Morrison's voice carried across the memorial grounds. Or you can explain to your mother why you're being sent to military school in Virginia. Your choice. Around them, the crowd had grown. Word spreading. Phones coming out now. Not to mock. To document. To record what felt like a significant moment. Veterans were moving closer. Active duty Marines. Families. Everyone sensing that something important was unfolding. An elderly woman approached William. Touched his arm gently. Her eyes were kind. Knowing. I serve as a nurse in Vietnam, she said softly. I know that look. I know what it costs. Thank you for your service. She squeezed his arm once and moved back into the crowd. William's eyes burned. He blinked hard, forced the emotion down, locked it away in the same place he kept everything else. The place that was getting too full, that threatened to overflow at moments like this. Brendan cleared his throat. His voice cracked when he began to speak. The President of the United States, in the name of the Congress, takes pleasure in presenting the Medal of Honor to Gunnery Sergeant William R. Chun, United States Marine Corps, for service as set forth in the following citation. The crowd went absolutely silent, the kind of silence that made breathing sound loud, that made heartbeats audible, that turned the world into a cathedral where the only thing that mattered was the words being spoken. Brendan continued, his voice gaining strength as he read, but losing certainty. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as team leader, Force Reconnaissance Platoon, 1st Marine Division, in support of Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Iraq, on November 14, 2004. William's hands shook worse, the memories flooding back. The house, the window, Ray's blood, the weight of the Barrett, the 6 hours that felt like 6 lifetimes. The screaming in his radio, the smoke, the fire, the bodies, so many bodies. When his team came under intense enemy fire from a fortified position, Gunnery Sergeant Chun moved to an exposed location to provide covering fire. Brendan's voice faltered. He looked up at William, at the old man's shaking hands. Understanding beginning to dawn. Real understanding. Not intellectual. Visceral. Despite being wounded by shrapnel from a mortar attack, he continued to engage enemy forces with devastating accuracy. A retired general in the crowd came to attention. Others followed, one by one, veterans standing, straightening, honoring, recognizing. The younger Marines looked confused at first. Then they too stood, even if they didn't fully understand why, even if they just knew that something sacred was happening. Over the course of 6 hours, while surrounded and cut off from reinforcement, Gunnery Sergeant Chin single-handedly eliminated 47 enemy combatants. Brendan's voice was shaking now, his hands gripping the paper so hard it crumpled at the edges. His sustained fire enabled the safe evacuation of 17 wounded Marines who would have otherwise perished. Someone in the crowd gasped. 47. The number hung in the air. Impossible. Superhuman. The kind of statistic that didn't seem real. That couldn't be real, but was. William closed his eyes, saw every face, remembered every shot, every target, every squeeze of the trigger, every recoil, every body that dropped, every life that ended because his hands had been steady when nothing else was. 47 men who went home to their families in boxes because William Chun had been better at killing than they were. Despite suffering severe wounds to both hands that severed multiple nerves, Brendan read, his voice breaking completely now. Gunnery Sergeant Chun refused medical evacuation until all casualties had been extracted and the position was secure. Torres had tears streaming down her face. She wasn't alone. The elderly nurse was weeping. Other veterans, family members, even some of the younger Marines whose understanding of war was still theoretical, still clean, still untouched by the reality of what it meant to kill or die for your brothers. His extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty reflected great credit upon himself and were in keeping with the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and the United States Naval Service. Brendan finished reading. The paper fell from his hands. He looked at William with eyes that had aged years and minutes. "I'm so sorry." The words were inadequate, pathetic, meaningless in the face of what he had done, what he had mocked, what he had failed to understand. The crowd remained silent, waiting, watching, wondering what would happen next. William's hands shook so badly now that he couldn't clasp them together anymore, the tremors running through his entire body. Visible, undeniable. The cost of that day written into his nervous system, into his DNA, into every cell that had been rewired by trauma and damage, and the price of surviving when better men died. Colonel Morrison stepped forward, came to attention. Render da Christ salute. Holding it, maintaining it, showing respect not to rank, but to valor, to sacrifice, to the man who had earned the right to be saluted by colonels and generals and presidents. One by one, every veteran in the crowd followed, every active duty Marine, even some civilians who understood that something profound was occurring. Hands raised, held steady, honoring the man whose hands would never be steady again. William's eyes moved across the crowd, across the salutes, across the tears, across the recognition that he had spent 20 years trying to avoid. His chest tightened, his throat closed. the emotion threatening to overwhelm the discipline that had kept him standing this long. Ray, he thought, you should be here instead of me. You should be the one they're saluting. You deserve this life more than I do. But Ray was on the wall, cold granite, silent witness. Forever 19. Forever his uncle's greatest failure. Forever the promise William couldn't keep. The old man who had been invisible moments ago now stood at the center of everything. Exposed, recognized, unable to hide any more behind poverty and tremors and the protective obscurity of being forgotten. The weight of attention pressed down on him like physical force, like the rucksack that carried his dead, like the guilt that never got lighter no matter how many miles he walked. And through it all, his hands continued to shake. The permanent reminder of the day he became a hero and lost everything that mattered. The salutes held for what felt like an eternity. William Chun stood in the center of that respect like a man drowning in unwanted attention. Every eye on him, every phone camera capturing this moment, every witness documenting his exposure. The anonymity he had cultivated for 20 years was gone, burned away in minutes by a teenager's cruelty and a colonel's lesson in respect. He could leave, could turn and walk away from this memorial, from these people, from the recognition that felt more like accusation than honor. Nobody would stop him. Nobody would chase him down. He was free to retreat back into obscurity, back into the shadows where broken things belonged. But Ray's name was on that wall. Danny's name, Kevin's name, the names of men who couldn't walk away, who couldn't choose obscurity, who were trapped forever in granite and memory and the perpetual present tense of the dead. William had made a promise to visit them, to remember them, to stand witness to their sacrifice on this day every year until he joined them. He couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until he had finished what he came here to do. Colonel Morrison lowered his salute. The others followed in a cascade of movement. Hands dropping, attention relaxing, but the respect remained, visible in postures, in expressions, in the careful distance people maintained, as if William was made of glass that might shatter from too much contact. William's voice came out rough. Damaged. Sir, may I return to the memorial now? The question was formal. Prupe, the kind of request made between ranks even though William had retired decades ago. Even though the chain of command no longer bound him. Old habits died harder than old soldiers. Morrison nodded. Of course. But first, he turned to Brendan. My son has something to say to you. Something more than the inadequate apology he offered before. Brendan stepped forward. His face was blotchy, red around the eyes. The cockiness had been completely stripped away. What remained was just a scared kid who had realized too late that actions had consequences. That cruelty left marks. That some mistakes couldn't be taken back, no matter how badly you wanted to. Sir, Brendan began. His voice cracked. Started over. Gunnery Sergeant Chun. He stopped. Swallowed hard. There aren't words for how sorry I am. I judged you by your appearance. By your hands. I didn't see you. Didn't see what you sacrificed. What you lost. I made jokes. Filmed you. Mocked wounds you earned saving people. William watched the boy struggle. Saw the genuine remorse warring with embarrassment. Saw the teenager who still had decades to learn what war actually meant. What service actually cost. What sacrifice looked like when it wasn't romanticized in movies or video games. You're 17, William said quietly. When I was 17, I thought I knew everything too. Thought war was glory and honor and coming home a hero. The tremors made his words shake slightly. Made him sound older than his 72 years. You don't know what you don't know until the bullets start flying. But that doesn't excuse, Brendan started. No, William interrupted. It doesn't, but explains. He paused. Let his eyes move across the crowd, across the faces watching this interaction. You're young enough to learn, to change, to become better. That's more than a lot of people get. The question is whether you will. Whether this moment matters enough to shift how you see the world. Brendan's throat worked. Tears streaming openly now. I will. I swear I will. I'll never forget this. Never forget you. Never. William's expression softened slightly. The hardness around his eyes easing just a fraction. Good. Then, maybe something worthwhile came from this day besides grief. He extended his right hand, trembling, shaking badly, but offered nonetheless. Brendan stared at the hand, at the visible tremors, at the scars barely visible beneath weathered skin, at the physical evidence of courage and sacrifice and cost. He took the hand carefully, reverently, like he was touching something sacred. The shake was brief, gentle, but it meant everything. "Thank you," Brendan whispered, "for the grace you just showed me, for not crushing me when you had every right to." William released the boy's hand, turned to Colonel Morrison. "Sir, I appreciate what you were trying to teach your son, but I really do need to finish what I came here for. The memorial, my time with the names." "Of course." Morrison stepped aside, created space. "But before you go, there's someone here who would like to speak with you." He gestured to a woman standing at the edge of the crowd. Professional attire, kind eyes, the bearing of someone who had seen trauma and learned how to carry it without breaking. Dr. Sarah Vance stepped forward, extended her hand in greeting, saw William's tremors, and smoothly converted the gesture into a respectful nod instead. "Gunnery Sergeant Shun, I run a reintegration program for combat veterans. Not through the VA. Independent. Funded by private donors. We help operators transition back into civilian life. Help them find housing, employment, community. No paperwork. No bureaucracy. Just help." William's jaw tightened. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I'm fine where I am." Dr. Vance's expression didn't change, didn't judge, didn't push. "The shelter in Oceanside. The 12-mile walk here every year. The bench where you sit alone." She paused. "With respect, sir, that's not fine. That's surviving. There's a difference." William looked away, back to the wall, to raise name visible from where he stood. "Surviving is all I deserve. That's the guilt talking." Dr. Vance's voice was gentle but firm. "The same guilt every survivor carries. The belief that you should have died instead. That you don't deserve help or comfort or healing. I've heard it from 1,000 veterans. It's never true. You don't know what I did," William said. "What I failed to do. Who I failed to save. Ray Chun." Dr. Vance said the name quietly. "Your nephew, 19 years old. Killed November 14th, 2004. You promised his mother you'd keep him safe. You blame yourself for his death despite the fact that you were operating in one of the most dangerous combat zones in modern warfare. Despite the fact that you did everything humanly possible to save him." William's head snapped around. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know." Dr. Vance gestured to the wall. "Every name on this memorial has a story. Has family left behind. Has survivors carrying guilt they don't deserve. I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've learned to recognize the patterns, the signs, the way trauma writes itself across faces and bodies and lives." William's hand shook worse. The conversation was stripping away defenses he had spent 2 decades building, exposing wounds that had never healed, never would heal. "I can't," he said. "Can't accept help. Can't move forward. Can't let go of the weight. If I do, if I allow myself peace, then their deaths meant nothing. Then I'm betraying them all over again." Dr. Vance shook her head. "Surviving isn't betraying them. Living isn't dishonoring their memory. Finding peace doesn't mean forgetting." She stepped closer. "The program I run, we have other force recon operators. Other men who held positions when everyone else evacuated. Who made impossible shots under impossible conditions. Who carry names on their skin and in their hearts. You're not alone in this." "I've been alone for 20 years, William said. "It's what I know now. Then maybe it's time to know something different." Dr. Vance pulled a card from her pocket, held it out. "No pressure, no obligation. But if you decide you're tired of walking 12 miles alone, if you decide surviving isn't enough anymore, call me. We have a bed. We have people who understand. We have space for you to exist without judgment." William stared at the card, at the phone number printed in simple black text, at the possibility of something different than the pattern he had walked for 2 decades. His hand moved slowly, trembling, took the card with the same reverence Brendan had used when shaking his hand. "I'm not ready," William said. "Nobody ever is," Dr. Vance replied. "But the door stays open. Today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, whenever you need it. She stepped back, gave him space, gave him the dignity of choice without pressure. The crowd was beginning to disperse. The ceremony would continue soon. Other families waiting their turn at the wall. Other names demanding remembrance. Colonel Morrison approached one more time. Gunnery Sergeant Shun, what happened here today? My son's behavior. Your exposure. I apologize for all of it. You deserve to grieve in peace. William nodded, accepted the apology without words, turned finally toward the wall, toward Ray's name, toward the communion he had come here to complete. The crowd parted for him, created space, let him walk to the memorial alone. His gait was slow, measured, the walk of a man carrying weight that never got lighter no matter how many miles he traveled. When he reached the wall, when his trembling fingers found Ray's name, when he began the whispered conversation he had with the dead every year, the crowd turned away, gave him privacy, gave him the respect of grief witnessed but not intruded upon. Brendan Morrison watched from a distance, watched the old man trace letters with shaking hands, watched the physical manifestation of courage and sacrifice and cost. The image would stay with him for the rest of his life, would shape every decision, would remind him that heroes don't always look like heroes, that sacrifice leaves scars that never fully heal. That respect must be earned but costs nothing to give. The teenager who had mocked those trembling hands was gone. What remained was someone slightly older, slightly wiser, forever changed by the moment when cruelty met consequence and grace taught a lesson that books never could. William Chen's fingers traced the letters one more time. Raymond. Chun. The stone was warm from the afternoon sun. The same sun that had beaten down on Fallujah 20 years ago. The same sun that had witnessed everything and judged nothing and kept rising regardless of who lived or died beneath it. Still here, brother, William whispered. The words came automatically now. Part of the ritual. Part of the annual pilgrimage that marked time in his life more reliably than calendars or seasons. 20 years. 2 decades of walking 12 miles to stand at this wall. 2 decades of surviving when better men didn't. The ceremony had resumed behind him. The general was speaking again, reading more names, calling families forward to place wreaths and flowers and teddy bears beneath granite that would outlast memory. The ritual of remembrance continuing its ancient pattern. The living honoring the dead. The survivors carrying forward the names of those who couldn't carry themselves. William became aware of someone standing beside him, not close enough to intrude, but near enough to indicate intention. He turned slightly, saw Sergeant Major Torres. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the wall, on a name 3 panels over. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres. Qui a Afghanistan, Dominos. Your husband? William asked quietly. Brother, Torres replied. Her voice was steady, but the pain underneath was audible to anyone who knew how to listen. IED on a supply run. He was supposed to rotate home the next week. Had already picked out the restaurant where he was taking his wife for their anniversary. William nodded, understood without needing details. Every name on this wall had a story, had a moment when everything changed, had family left behind to carry the weight. I'm sorry for your loss. Torres looked at him finally. 26 years I've been doing memorial ceremonies. Every year I watch families grieve, watch veterans stand at this wall carrying guilt they don't deserve, watch the cost of service play out across generations. She paused, but in all those years, I've never seen someone carry it like you do, like you're trying to punish yourself by surviving. William's jaw tightened. Maybe I am. Why? Torres turned to face him fully. You did everything possible. Held that position for 6 hours. Saved 17 Marines. Earned the Medal of Honor. Why does that translate into 2 decades of homelessness and isolation? Because Ray shouldn't have been there, William said. His voice was rough, damaged. My sister begged me to keep him safe. He was just a kid, 19 years old. Joined the Marines because I had served. Requested force recon because I had been force recon. Died because I missed a window. Because I wasn't good enough. Wasn't fast enough. The tremors in his hands intensified. Everything I did after he died, all those kills, all that time holding the position, it doesn't bring him back. Doesn't change the fact that I failed the one mission that actually mattered. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I read the full after-action report. Not just the Medal of Honor citation. The classified version. The one that details exactly what happened in that house. William's eyes closed. Didn't want to hear it. Didn't want the facts recited back at him like they could change anything. You cleared that building twice, Torres continued. Standard protocol. Both times it was empty. The insurgents infiltrated after you passed. They were specifically hunting American forces. Had set up an ambush. You walked into a trap that was designed by people who knew exactly how we operate. Doesn't matter, Williams said. Should have cleared it a third time. Should have been more careful. Should have kept Ray back until I was certain. The RPG that killed Ray came from a fighter who had been hiding in a false ceiling, Torres said. In a space that wasn't visible from any angle you could have checked without demolishing the entire building. You couldn't have found him. Nobody could have. It was an impossible situation that you somehow survived and your nephew didn't. That's not failure. That's tragedy. Feels the same, Williams said. I know it does. Torres looked back at her brother's name. I carry that same guilt for years. Thought I should have convinced Michael not to take that supply run. Should have gotten him transferred home early. Should have done something, anything differently. She paused, but a therapist finally made me understand. We don't control the universe. We don't control the bullets or the IEDs or the enemy. We can only control our own actions. And based on the evidence, your actions were extraordinary. William's hand shook worse. The conversation was stripping away the protective layer of guilt he had wrapped around himself. The identity he had built as the man who failed. As the survivor who didn't deserve to survive. Without that guilt, without that punishment, who was he? What was left? Dr. Vance's program, Torres said. It works. I've seen it. Operators who were living under bridges. Who were drinking themselves to death. Who were one bad day away from eating their service weapons. They're alive now. Functional. Some of them even happy. She turned back to William. You don't have to live like this. Punishing yourself doesn't honor Ray. It just adds another casualty to the list. He was 19, William said. The words came out broken. Had his whole life ahead of him. Was going to be an engineer. Build bridges. Connect things. Make the world better. Instead, he died in my arms in a city that most Americans can't find on a map. Died for a war that we didn't even win. Died because I wasn't good enough to protect him. You were good enough to save 17 other Marines, Torres said firmly. Good enough to hold an impossible position for 6 hours while wounded. Good enough to earn the highest honor this country gives. That's the objective truth. The rest is guilt talking. Survivor's guilt that's eating you alive and accomplishing nothing except making Ray's death count for even less. The words hit like physical blows. William staggered slightly. Caught himself. His breathing was ragged now. Uncontrolled. The emotion he had been holding back for 20 years threatening to overwhelm the discipline that kept him standing. I don't know how to let go, William admitted. The confession came out barely above a whisper. Don't know how to stop carrying them. If I do, if I allow myself to heal, then what? Then they're just gone? Then their deaths meant nothing? Then I move on and forget and become someone who let his nephew die and didn't even have the decency to be destroyed by it? Torres reached out slowly, gave William time to refuse. When he didn't pull back, she placed her hand on his shoulder. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. Moving forward doesn't mean leaving them behind. It means carrying them differently, with honor instead of punishment, with memory instead of torture. William looked at her hand on his shoulder. The first intentional human contact he had experienced in months that wasn't transactional. Wasn't a handshake or a pat down or a medical examination. Just human connection. Just kindness offered without expectation of return. The car Dr. Vance gave me, William said. His voice was shaking now along with his hands. Along with his entire body. The program. Tell me the truth. Will it actually help? Or is it just another false promise from people who don't understand what it's like to carry the dead? Torres met his eyes, held his gaze with the directness that came from 26 years of service and leadership and truth-telling. It will help. I can't promise it will fix everything. Can't promise you'll stop seeing Ray when you close your eyes. But it will give you tools, community, purpose, a reason to survive that goes beyond punishment. William's hand moved to his pocket, found the card, pulled it out with trembling fingers, stared at the phone number like it was written in a language he didn't speak. Like calling would be crossing a threshold he could never uncross. Admitting that 2 decades of suffering hadn't been noble sacrifice, but just suffering, just waste. Colonel Morrison approached again, walked slowly, respectfully, giving William time to compose himself. Gunnery Sergeant Chun, he said, my son would like to speak with you again, if you're willing. William turned, saw Brendan standing 20 feet away. The boy looked smaller now, younger, the arrogance completely gone, replaced with something that looked like genuine humility, genuine understanding of magnitude. What is it? William asked. Brendan stepped forward. His voice was quiet, careful. Sir, I've been thinking about what I did, what you've been through, what those hands represent. He paused. I want to volunteer. At the VA, at programs that help veterans. I want to do something that matters instead of just existing on my father's reputation. William studied the boy, looking for signs of performance, of saying what adults wanted to hear. But Brendan's eyes were clear, honest. The transformation might not be permanent, might not last beyond the shame of this moment. But it was real right now. That was enough. Good, William said. The world needs people who understand that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform, that the cost keeps accumulating long after the shooting stops. He paused. Just remember this feeling, this moment, when you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance, by their circumstances. Remember that you have no idea what they've survived, what they've sacrificed, what they carry. I will, Brendan promised. I swear I will. William turned back to the wall, to Ray's name. One more time. The ritual wasn't complete yet. The words hadn't all been said. The annual accounting wasn't finished. But in his pocket, his fingers closed around Dr. Vance's card. Held it. Didn't throw it away. That was something. Small. Insignificant maybe. But something. The memorial ceremony was winding down. Families had placed their flowers. Veterans had paid their respects. The Marine Corps hymn had played for the final time. The honor guard stood at attention, waiting for the order to dismiss. Everything moving through its ordained pattern like a ritual that had been performed so many times it had worn grooves into the earth. William Chun remained at the wall, his fingers still touching Ray's name. The stone had grown cooler as the sun moved across the sky. Soon it would be evening. Soon the memorial grounds would empty. Soon he would begin the 12-mile walk back to Oceanside, back to the shelter, back to the routine that had defined his existence for 2 decades. Except something had changed. The card in his pocket felt heavy, significant, like it carried weight beyond paper and ink, like it represented a choice he wasn't ready to make but couldn't ignore anymore. A voice came from behind him, rough with age and cigarettes. Excuse-moi, son. William turned. An elderly man stood there, probably in his 80s, wearing a Vietnam veteran cap and a jacket covered in patches. His eyes were sharp despite the wrinkles, the kind of eyes that had seen combat and never quite forgotten how to read threats. The old man extended his hand, slowly, respectfully. Joseph Keene, 1st Air Cavalry, Ai Drang Valley, 1965. William took the offer hand. William Chun, Force Recon, Fallujah. I know who you are, Keene said. Heard them read your citation. Saw those kids mocking you before they knew better. He paused. I've been coming to these memorials for 40 years. Watched a lot of young men become old men. Watch a lot of old men die, still carrying their wars. You remind me of someone. Who's that? William asked. Me, Keene said. 30 years ago, living under a bridge in San Diego, drinking away the ghosts. Convinced I didn't deserve help because better men had died. Convinced that suffering was the only way to honor them. William's jaw tightened. What changed? My daughter found me, Keene said. Dragged me to a VA program against my will. I fought it every step. Told myself I was fine, that I didn't need help, that accepting support meant betraying the men I'd lost. He smiled sadly. You know what I learned? That the best way to honor the dead is to actually live. Not just survive, actually live. William looked away, back to the wall, to the names. I don't know if I can do that. Nobody does it first, Keene said. But here's the thing about us, about the ones who made it home. We're still here for a reason. Maybe it's random. Maybe it's luck. Maybe it's God's plan or fate or just the chaos of combat. But we're here, and we have a choice. We can waste the life we were given, or we can use it to help the next generation of broken warriors coming home. I'm not a counselor, William said. Not a therapist. I'm just. He gestured at himself, at the trembling hands and donated clothes and 2 decades of accumulated damage. This. So was I, Keene replied. But that program my daughter forced me into? I've been volunteering there for 25 years, helping other Vietnam vets, talking them down from ledges, literal and figurative, giving them the truth nobody else will tell them, that surviving isn't a sin, that they're allowed to heal. William's hand shook worse. The conversation was dismantling defenses faster than he could rebuild them. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw you reach for that card, Keene said. So you hold on to it instead of throwing it away. That's the first step, the hardest step, admitting that maybe, just maybe, there's another way to live. He stepped closer. That doctor who gave your card? Sarah Vance? I know her. She's good. She's real. She doesn't bullshit veterans, and she doesn't make promises she can't keep. If she says the program helps, it helps. William pulled the card from his pocket, stared at it again. The phone number seemed to pulse, to demand action, to represent a fork in the road that would determine the rest of his life. I'm scared, he admitted. The words came out before he could stop them. Scared that if I let go of the guilt, if I stop punishing myself, then I'm admitting that Ray's death was meaningless, that all the suffering I've endured was wasted. Keene's expression softened. Ray's death was meaningless either way, son. All deaths in war are. That's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. But what you do with the life he didn't get to live, that can have meaning. That can matter. You can honor him by helping other veterans survive what you survived, by being the voice that says it's okay to accept help, by proving that warriors can come home broken and still become whole again. William's eyes burned, the tears he had been holding back for years, threatening to overwhelm him. I don't deserve that. Don't deserve peace or healing or happiness. Not when he's in the ground and I'm still breathing. That survivor's guilt talking, Keene said firmly. And it's lying to you. Ray wouldn't want this for you. Wouldn't want you living under bridges and walking 12 miles to talk to stone. He'd want you to live. Really live. To laugh and love and find purpose beyond punishment. You don't know what he'd want, William said. But the protest was weak. Hollow. Because deep down, past all the guilt and self-recrimination, he knew Keene was right. Ray had been kind, generous, the type of kid who gave his lunch to homeless people and volunteered at animal shelters. He wouldn't have wanted this. Wouldn't have wanted his death to destroy his uncle. Maybe not, Keene admitted, but I know what my buddies would have wanted. The ones who died in the IA Drang. They wouldn't have wanted me drinking myself to death in an alley. Wouldn't have wanted me wasting the life they didn't get to have. So I made a choice. To live for them. To honor them by becoming someone they'd be proud of. He paused. You can make the same choice. William looked at the card again. At the phone number that represented possibility. Change. Risk. The unknown terrified him more than homelessness. More than the familiar pattern of suffering. At least suffering was predictable. At least he knew how to endure. But healing? Recovery? Purpose? Those were foreign territories with no map. Dr. Vance, Williams said slowly. Her program. What does it actually involve? Housing first, Keene said. A bed. Meals. Stability. Then counseling. Individual and group. Other operators who've been where you are. Who understand the weight without needing explanations. Then practical stuff. Job training. Resume building. Reconnecting with family, if you have any. Building community. Family, William repeated. The word felt strange in his mouth. Foreign. His sister had stopped trying to contact him years ago. Had probably given up hope. Had probably mourned him like she mourned Ray. as another casualty of Fallujah, just one that took longer to die. You have a sister, Keen said. It wasn't a question. Someone who lost Ray too. Someone who's been living with her own guilt, her own grief, wondering if you blame her for asking you to watch over him, wondering if that's why you disappeared. William's chest tightened. He had never thought about it that way, had never considered that his sister might be carrying her own weight, her own guilt, might think his absence was punishment, rejection, blame directed at her for asking the impossible. Oh God, William whispered. What have I done? What we all do when we're in pain. Keen said gently. You survived the only way you knew how. By running. By isolating. By punishing yourself, because it felt like the only thing you could control. But that doesn't have to be the rest of your story. You can choose different. Choose better. William's hand closed around the card. Squeezed it. The paper crumpled slightly, but didn't tear. A metaphor, maybe, for resilience. For the possibility that even damaged things could still serve purpose. Could still matter. What if I call her and it doesn't work? William asked. What if I'm too broken? What if 20 years was too long and I can't come back from this? Then at least you tried, Keen said. At least you gave yourself a chance. At least you honored Ray by refusing to let his death destroy you completely. He reached out, placed a hand on William's shoulder. The same gesture Torres had made. Human connection offered without expectation. You're not alone in this. Never were. You just convinced yourself you had to be. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the memorial grounds, turning the granite wall golden, illuminating the names so they seemed to glow. Ray's name among them. Forever young. Forever 19. Forever his uncle's greatest grief. Still here, brother, William whispered one more time. But maybe it's time I actually started living instead of just surviving. Maybe that's what you'd want. Maybe that's the only way to honor you properly. The name didn't answer. Stone couldn't speak. The dead remained silent. But in that silence, William thought he felt something. Permission, maybe. Release. The sense that Ray had never wanted his death to be an anchor. Had never intended his sacrifice to become his uncle's prison. William pulled out his phone. Ancient. Barely functional, but could make calls. He looked at Dr. Vance's card, at the number that represented everything he feared and everything he needed. His finger hovered over the keypad. Do it, Keen said quietly. Make the call. Take the first step. Everything else will follow. William's finger moved, began pressing numbers. Each digit was a decision. Each decision was a choice. Each choice was a step away from 2 decades of suffering and towards something he couldn't quite name yet, but desperately needed. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered. This is Dr. William's voice came out rough, barely functional. Dr. Vance. This is... He paused, swallowed hard. This is William Chun. You gave me your card. At the memorial. I remember, Dr. Vance said. Her voice was calm, professional, but underneath was warmth. Genuine care. I'm glad you called. How can I help you? The question was simple, direct, but answering it felt like admitting defeat, like surrendering after a 20-year siege. I don't know if you can, William said. Don't know if anyone can. But I'm tired. Tired of walking. Tired of carrying weight that never gets lighter. Tired of surviving without living. That's honest, Dr. Vance said. Honesty is a good place to start. Where are you right now? Still at the memorial. At Camp Pendleton. William looked around. The grounds were nearly empty now. Just a few stragglers. Veterans like Keen who understood that leaving was always the hardest part. That walking away from the names felt like abandonment, even when logic said otherwise. And you were planning to walk back to Oceanside tonight? 12 miles? Yes, ma'am. Don't, Dr. Vance said. Stay there. I'll come get you. We have a facility in Carlsbad. 20 minutes from where you are. You can have a bed tonight. Hot meal. Shower. No commitment beyond tonight. Just one night where you're not sleeping in a shelter or walking highways in the dark. William's throat tightened. The offer is too much. Too generous. Too undeserved. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Dr. Vance said firmly. It's a debt being paid. Every veteran who helps another veteran is paying forward the help they received. The cycle only works if people accept when it's their turn. Right now, it's your turn. Keene squeezed William's shoulder, nodded, encouraging, reinforcing. Okay, William said. The word came out barely audible, but it was said. The commitment was made. One night, just to see. One night, Dr. Vance agreed. Stay where you are. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And William? You made the right choice. The hardest choice. Everything else will be easier from here. The call ended. William stood there holding his ancient phone like it was made of something precious, something fragile. His hands were shaking worse than ever. But this time the tremors felt different. Not just nerve damage and trauma, but also fear, hope, the possibility of change. You did good, Keene said. Real good. That was the hard part. Picking up the phone, admitting you need help. Everything else is just showing up and doing the work. What if I can't do the work? William asked. What if I'm too damaged? Too far gone? You held a position for 6 hours while wounded, Keene reminded him. Saved 17 Marines. If you can do that, you can do this. It's just a different kind of fight. Longer, slower, but you've got the discipline, got the stubbornness, got everything you need to win. William looked at Ray's name one more time. The ritual still incomplete. The words still unsaid. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the ritual could change, could evolve, could become something more than annual punishment disguised as remembrance. I'm going to try, brother, William whispered to the stone, to the name, to the memory of the 19-year-old kid who had died in his arms. Going to try to live the life you didn't get. Going to try to make it mean something. Going to try to stop wasting the years you deserved. The stone offered no response. But William felt something shift. Some internal weight redistributing. Not gone. Never gone. But maybe carried differently. With purpose instead of punishment. With memory instead of torture. Colonel Morrison approached one final time. He had been watching from a distance, giving William space, but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Gunnery Sergeant Chun, he said, I wanted to apologize again for how this day unfolded. For the exposure. For the loss of your privacy. William shook his head. Don't apologize, sir. Your son needed to learn. And maybe, he paused, maybe I needed this too. Needed to be reminded that hiding doesn't heal. That isolation doesn't honor the dead. That there are people who still care. Morrison extended his hand. If you need anything, references for employment, documentation of your service, character witnesses, you call me directly. He pressed a card into William's hand. Different from Dr. Vance's, but equally significant. My personal number, not the official line. You use it. William took the card, added it to his pocket alongside Dr. Vance's. 2 pieces of paper that represented connection, community. The opposite of the isolation he had cultivated for 20 years. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. Brendan appeared beside his father. The boy had been crying. His eyes were red, swollen, the kind of tears that came from genuine remorse rather than fear of punishment. Sir, Brendan said, I know I already apologized, but I wanted to say, I'm going to remember this. Going to remember you. Going to make sure I never judge someone by appearance again. Never assume I know someone's story. William studied the teenager, sought genuine transformation, or at least the beginning of it. Time would tell if the change was permanent, if the lesson stuck beyond today's shame. But the intention was real. That mattered. Good, William said. Then something worthwhile came from today. He paused. And Brendan, when you volunteer at the VA like you promised, remember that every veteran you meet has a story, has sacrifice, has cost, even if you can't see it, even if they don't talk about it. Treat everyone like they might be carrying what I carry. I will, Brendan promised. His voice was thick with emotion. I swear I will. Sergeant Major Torres approached last. She had been coordinating the ceremony's conclusion, making sure everything was done properly, done with honor. Now she stood before William with tears in her eyes. Steady, she said. The call sign carried weight. Respect. Recognition not just of what he had been, but what he still was beneath the damage. Mum, William responded. The automatic respect. The ingrained discipline. Thank you, Torres said, for your service, for what you sacrificed, for being willing to accept help so that other veterans can see it's possible. You're going to save lives with this decision. Maybe not with a rifle this time, but with your presence, your story, your willingness to be vulnerable. William's chest tightened. The idea that his suffering could serve a purpose beyond punishment was foreign. Strange. Almost impossible to accept. But Torres believed it. Keene believed it. Dr. Vance believed it. Maybe, eventually, he could believe it too. Headlights appeared at the memorial entrance. A dark SUV. Dr. Vance had arrived exactly when she said she would. Punctual. Reliable. The kind of person who kept promises. Who showed up when showing up mattered. "That's my ride," Williams said. The words felt surreal. Like he was narrating someone else's life. Someone who accepted help. Who moved toward healing. Who chose living over mere surviving. "Go," Keene said. "And when you get there, when you're sitting in a real bed with a hot meal and a roof over your head, remember this feeling. Remember that accepting help doesn't make you weak. Makes you human." William nodded. Turned toward the SUV. Took 3 steps. Stopped. Turned back to the wall one more time. Teresa's name glowing in the last light of sunset. "I love you, brother," William said. The words he should have said 20 years ago. The words he had been too shocked, too traumatized, too broken to say while Ray died in his arms. "I'm sorry I failed you. Sorry I couldn't keep my promise. Sorry it took me 20 years to start living again. But I'm going to try now. Going to try to make your death mean something by helping others survive what I survived." The name didn't answer. Couldn't answer. But William felt release. Permission. The sense that Ray had never needed his uncle to suffer. Had never wanted William's life to become a monument to guilt. Had only ever wanted his uncle to live. William walked toward the SUV. Each step was a choice. Each choice was a commitment. Each commitment was a step away from 2 decades of punishment and towards something he couldn't quite name yet, but desperately needed. Dr. Vance stood beside the vehicle. She was exactly as he remembered from the ceremony. Professional. Kind. Real. She extended her hand, saw his tremors, and converted the gesture smoothly to opening the passenger door instead. "Ready?" she asked. "No," William said honestly. "But I'm going anyway." "That's all anyone can ask," Dr. Vance said. She gestured to the interior. "Clean. Warm. Safe. Let's go home." Home. The word felt foreign. William couldn't remember the last time he had called anywhere home. The shelter wasn't home. The bench at the memorial wasn't home. The streets of Oceanside weren't home. Home was something he had lost 20 years ago when Ray died. When he walked away from his sister. When he chose isolation over connection. But maybe home could be rebuilt. Maybe home wasn't a place, but a decision. A commitment to stop running. To stop hiding. To stop punishing himself for surviving when better men died. William climbed into the SUV. Fastened the seatbelt with trembling hands. Looked back one final time at the memorial wall. At the names glowing in twilight. At Ray and Danny and Kevin and all the others who hadn't made it home. "Still here, brothers," William whispered. Still trying. But trying differently now. Trying better. The SUV pulled away from the memorial. Carried William toward an uncertain future. Toward possibility. Toward the terrifying prospect of healing. The wall disappeared behind them. The names faded into darkness. But the memory remained. Would always remain. The difference was that now William was choosing to carry that memory forward instead of letting it drag him down. In the passenger seat, trembling hands clutched 2 business cards. 2 lifelines. 2 connections to a world he had abandoned 20 years ago. The cards were just paper. Just ink. But they represented everything. Choice. Community. The radical possibility that broken things could be put back together. That warriors could come home. That surviving could transform into living. One night, William told himself. Just one night. Just to see. But deep down, past all the fear and resistance, he knew the truth. One night would become 2. 2 would become a week. A week would become a month. This wasn't just a trial. This was the beginning of something new. Something different. Something that honored the dead by refusing to join them prematurely. The SUV merged onto the highway, headed north toward Carlsbad, toward the facility, toward beds and meals and community and the long, slow work of healing. William closed his eyes, let the motion of the vehicle wash over him, let himself rest for the first time in 20 years without guilt demanding he stay vigilant, stay alert, Stay punished. Ray's face appeared in his memory. 19 years old, smiling, the way he had looked before Fallujah, before the war, before everything went wrong. And in William's imagination, his nephew smiled, nodded, gave permission for something William had been denying himself for 2 decades. "It's okay, Uncle." Ray's voice echoed in memory. "You can rest now. You can live. I never wanted you to die with me. I wanted you to live for both of us." William's hands finally stopped shaking, just for a moment, just long enough for him to whisper back to the memory, to the ghost, to the nephew who had died too young. "I will, brother. I promise. This time I'll keep my promise." 3 weeks had passed since the memorial ceremony. 3 weeks since William Chun had climbed into Dr. Vance's SUV and allowed himself to be carried towards something that still didn't feel real. 3 weeks of sleeping in an actual bed, of eating meals at a table surrounded by other veterans who understood without needing explanations, of sitting in group therapy sessions where grown men cried and nobody judged because everyone had cried at some point. The facility in Carlsbad was nothing like William had expected. Not institutional, not cold, not the kind of place that stripped dignity in the name of helping. It was a converted beachfront house. 8 bedrooms, communal kitchen, living room with comfortable furniture worn soft by bodies that needed comfort, windows that looked out over the Pacific, the kind of place that whispered safety instead of screaming charity. William's room was on the 2nd floor. Small, simple, but his. A bed with clean sheets, a desk, a chair, a window that let in morning light. More than he had owned in 20 years. More than he thought he deserved. But Dr. Vance had been clear from day one. Deserving didn't enter the equation. Need was the only metric that mattered. He sat in that room now, hands still trembling, staring at a phone number he had written on a piece of paper 3 weeks ago and hadn't called yet. His sister's number. The one Torres had tracked down through Marine Corps family databases. The one that represented connection or rejection, forgiveness or blame. The unknown terrified him more than Fallujah ever had. A knock on the door interrupted his spiral. "Come in," Williams said. Marcus Webb entered. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb from the photograph. From Fallujah, one of the 2 surviving faces from that recon team. Dr. Vance had tracked him down to Montana and convinced him to fly out for a visit, to see the brother he thought was dead, to help with the healing that neither man had been brave enough to attempt alone. Webb was bigger than William remembered, or maybe William had shrunk. 20 years of homelessness and malnutrition had a way of reducing people to essentials. Webb's face was weathered, lined, gray at the temples, but his eyes were the same, sharp, alert, the eyes of someone who never stopped scanning for threats, even in safety. "You gonna call her, or just stare at that number until it bursts into flames?" Webb asked. His voice was rough, familiar, the sound of brotherhood forged in blood and fire, and the shared weight of surviving when others didn't. William's jaw tightened. What if she hates me? What if she blames me for Ray? What if the last 20 years destroyed any chance of reconciliation? Webb sat on the edge of the bed. "Then you'll know, and knowing is better than wondering. Better than carrying maybes for another 20 years. William looked at his old teammate, at the brother who had held positions beside him, who had covered his 6 in firefights that should have killed them both, who had earned the right to speak truth without softening edges. "You ever contact your family? After everything?" Webb nodded. "Took me 15 years. 15 years of convincing myself they were better off without me. That my damage would only hurt them. That staying away was noble sacrifice instead of cowardice." He paused. "Turns out they spent those 15 years thinking I was dead, grieving me, wishing they could tell me one more time that they loved me. When I finally called, my mother cried for an hour. Not angry tears, relief tears." William's hands shook worse. The story hit too close, reflected too clearly. Ray's mother, his sister. She had probably spent 20 years thinking William blamed her, hated her, held her responsible for asking him to protect a son who died anyway. "Call her," Webb said. "Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now, while you still have the courage. While I'm here to catch you if it goes bad." William picked up his phone. The ancient device had been replaced with something modern, something that actually worked. Courtesy of the program. Courtesy of people who understood that connection required functioning technology. He dialed the number with trembling fingers. Each digit was a commitment. Each commitment was a risk. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. William's heart hammered. Maybe she wouldn't answer. Maybe she had changed numbers. Maybe this was a sign he should hang up and try again never. Then a voice. Hello. Female. Older than he remembered, but unmistakably his sister. Unmistakably the woman who had begged him to keep Ray safe. Who had lost a son because William had failed. Sarah, William said. His voice cracked on the name. It's me. It's William. Silence. Stretching. Eternal. William could hear breathing on the other end. Could hear the shock processing. Could hear 20 years of grief and anger and loss compressing into a single moment. Then a sound. Something between a sob and a gasp. William? The word came out broken. Disbelieving. Billy, is that really you? It's me, William confirmed. I'm alive. I'm in California. He couldn't finish. Couldn't explain 2 decades of absence in a sentence or a paragraph or anything that would make sense. Where have you been? Sarah's voice was shaking now, trembling with emotion that could be anger or relief or both. 20 years, Billy. 20 years without a word. Without a letter. Without anything. I thought you were dead. I mourned you. I buried you in my head right next to Ray. I'm sorry, William said. The words were inadequate. Pathetic. But they were all he had. I'm so sorry. I thought you blamed me. Thought you hated me for not protecting him. For failing to keep my promise. Blamed you? Sarah's voice rose. Cracked. Billy, you're the only reason I survived losing Ray. Knowing you were out there somewhere. Knowing that at least when you made a home. And then you disappeared. Just vanished. Left me with nothing. No closure. No explanation. Just absence. William's chest felt like it was caving in. The weight of his selfishness crushing him. The realization that his isolation had created another casualty. Another wound that festered for 20 years. I was wrong, he said. Wrong to leave. Wrong to hide. Wrong to assume you blamed me. I am. Broken, Sarah. Damaged in ways I couldn't let you see. Webb placed a hand on William's shoulder. Squeezed. Anchoring him. Keeping him from drowning in the conversation. Sarah was crying now. Openly. Loudly. The kind of tears that had been building for 2 decades. Where are you? She asked. Right now. Where are you? Carlsbad, William said. California. I'm in a program. For veterans. Learning how to live again. Carlsbad, Sarah repeated. That's 4 hours from me. I'm in Riverside. Billy, I'm coming. Today. Right now. I'm getting in my car, and I'm coming. Panic flared in William's chest. Sarah, you don't have to. I don't want to disrupt your life. Don't want to force myself back into. You listen to me? Sarah interrupted. Her voice was steel wrapped in tears. You are my brother, my only living family. And I have spent 20 years wondering if you were alive. Wondering if you hated me. Wondering if I said something wrong, or did something wrong, or failed you somehow. You do not get to deny me this. You do not get to protect me from seeing you. William's resistance crumbled. Okay, he whispered. Okay, give me the address, Sarah demanded. Right now. William recited the address. Heard his sister repeat it back. Heard her moving. Keys jangling. Door closing. Engine starting. The sounds of action. Of decision. Of a woman who had waited 20 years and refused to wait 1 more second. I'll be there in 4 hours, Sarah said. Don't you dare leave. Don't you dare disappear again. I won't, William promised. I'll be here. I swear I'll be here. The call ended. William sat holding the phone, staring at nothing, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Webb watched him carefully, ready to intervene if the weight became too much, ready to catch his brother if he fell. She's coming, William said. The words sounded surreal. Impossible. She's actually coming. Of course she is, Webb said. She's your sister. She loves you. That doesn't stop just because you disappeared. Doesn't stop just because you're broken. Doesn't stop just because 20 years passed. William's hands shook violently now. the stress overwhelming his damaged nervous system. What do I say to her? How do I explain 20 years? How do I apologize for that much damage? You start with the truth, Webb said. You tell her about the guilt, about the PTSD, about believing you didn't deserve family after failing to protect Ray, about the homelessness and the isolation and the daily walk to the memorial. You tell her everything. No filters, no protection, just truth. What if the truth is too much? William asked. What if it breaks her? Then she breaks, Webb said bluntly. And then she heals. Just like you're healing. Just like all of us are trying to heal. But you don't get to decide what she can handle. You don't get to protect her by lying or hiding. She's an adult. She's a mother who lost her son. She can handle truth even when it hurts. William nodded, accepted the wisdom even though accepting it terrified him. For hours. In 4 hours, he would see his sister for the first time in 20 years. Would face the woman who had asked him to protect her son. Would answer for 2 decades of absence. Dr. Vance appeared in the doorway. She had been monitoring, making sure the call went okay, making sure William didn't spiral. I heard, she said gently. Your sister is coming. That's good. That's healing. I'm terrified, William admitted. Good, Dr. Vance said. Terror means you care. Means this matters. Means you're not numb anymore. She stepped into the room. We'll prepare. We'll get you ready. And when she arrives, we'll be here. You won't face this alone. Webb stood, clapped William on the shoulder. I'm going to stay. For this. For as long as you need. Montana can wait. My family understands. They know what it means when brothers need each other. Thank you, William said. The words were insufficient, but sincere. Thank you for finding me. For believing I could be saved. For not giving up, even when I had given up on myself. That's what we do, Webb said simply. We save each other. It's the only mission that matters now. Outside the window, the Pacific Ocean stretched toward the horizon. Endless, unchanging, indifferent to human suffering and human healing alike. But inside this house, inside this room, transformation was happening. Slow, painful, but real. William Chun had spent 20 years running from family, from connection, from the possibility of forgiveness. In 4 hours, that running would end. In 4 hours, he would face his sister and the weight of 2 decades of absence. In 4 hours, he would discover whether some bridges could be rebuilt after being burned. The terror was overwhelming, but underneath the terror was something else. Something fragile, something that felt dangerously close to hope. 6 months had passed since Sarah Chun had walked through the door of the Carlsbad facility and collapsed in her brother's arms. 6 months since William had finally stopped running. 6 months of healing that felt both impossibly slow and shockingly fast. The memorial ceremony at Camp Pendleton looked the same as it did every year. Same granite wall, same etched names, same November sun showing no mercy. But everything else was different. Everything that mattered. William Chun stood before Ray's name, wearing clothes that actually fit. Donated still, but clean. Pressed. Chosen with care instead of grabbed from whatever bin had his size. His hand still shook. Would always shake. The nerve damage was permanent. But the tremors felt different now. Less like shame. More like scars. Evidence of survival instead of failure. Sarah stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. Not holding him up. Just present. Connected. They had rebuilt slowly over 6 months. Conversations that started awkward and became comfortable. Dinners that started silent and became warm. A relationship reforged through honesty and forgiveness and the shared weight of loving someone who died too young. Ray, Sarah said softly, her voice addressing the stone. Addressing the son who would be 13 now if the RPG had missed. If the insurgent had been spotted. If any of 1,000 variables had been different. Your uncle is doing better. He's helping other veterans now. Teaching them that accepting help isn't weakness. That surviving doesn't mean betraying the dead. William's throat tightened. The words Sarah spoke were true. He had started volunteering at the program, talking to newly arrived veterans, sharing his story without filters or protection, showing them that someone could spend 20 years homeless and still come back, still rebuild, still find purpose. The work was hard, triggering. Some days he wanted to run back to isolation. back to the familiar pattern of punishment disguised as remembrance. But Webb called every week. Sarah visited every Sunday. Dr. Vance checked in daily. The web of connection kept him tethered when gravity pulled toward old habits. A voice called from behind them. Gunnery Sergeant Chun? William turned. Saw Brendan Morrison approaching. The teenager was different too. Taller somehow. Older. The arrogance completely gone. Replaced with something that looked like humility earned through experience instead of forced through shame. Brendan, William said. Good to see you. The boy, now 18, stopped at respectful distance. I've been volunteering at the VA hospital 3 times a week, working with amputees, helping them with physical therapy, listening when they need to talk. He paused. You were right. About remembering that feeling. That moment. I think about it every time I'm tempted to judge someone. Good, William said. That means the lesson stuck. That means Ray's death taught something beyond grief. Colonel Morrison appeared beside his son. The base commander looked older, grayer, but his eyes were warm when they met William's. Gunnery Sergeant, how are you managing? Better, sir, William replied honestly. Still fighting, but fighting differently now. Fighting towards something instead of just fighting to survive. Morrison nodded. Understood. I wanted you to know. That video from the memorial. The one where Brendan read your citation. It went viral. Reached 40 million views. The comment section is filled with people sharing stories of their own hidden heroes. Veterans they knew who survived but struggled. People they had judged and now regretted judging. William felt uncomfortable with the attention, with the exposure. But Dr. Vance had helped him reframe it. Your story helps others, she had said. Your willingness to be vulnerable gives permission for other veterans to be vulnerable. That matters more than your comfort. I hope it helps, William said. Hope it makes people look twice before judging, before assuming they know someone's story. It does, Morrison assured him. I get letters, emails, from people who saw that video and reached out to homeless veterans in their communities, who donated to programs, who volunteered time. Your exposure created ripples. Sergeant Major Torres approached the group. She wore dress blues for the ceremony, ribbons gleaming, the picture of military professionalism. But her eyes were soft when she looked at William. Steady, she said, using the call sign with affection instead of formality. You ready? William nodded. Today was different. Today he wasn't just attending the ceremony. Today he was speaking, sharing his story publicly. Dr. Vance had asked. The ceremony organizers had invited. William had agreed, despite the terror. The crowd had grown larger than previous years. Word had spread. The Medal of Honor recipient who had been homeless for 20 years. The operator who had survived Fallujah but lost himself afterward. The man who had been publicly mocked and responded with grace. People wanted to hear him speak, wanted to understand how someone fell so far and climbed back. William walked to the podium with Sarah beside him, with Webb standing in the front row, with Dr. Vance nearby, with all the people who had refused to let him stay lost. The microphone waited. The crowd waited. Ray's name waited on the wall behind him. My name is William Chun, he began. His voice was rough but clear, amplified across the memorial grounds. 20 years ago, I stood at this wall for the first time. Stood here broken, guilty, convinced I didn't deserve to survive when my nephew Ray died. Convinced that the best way to honor the dead was to punish myself by living. The crowd was silent, attentive, hanging on every word. I was wrong, William continued. Surviving isn't betraying the dead. Accepting help isn't weakness. And the best way to honor those we lost isn't suffering. It's living, really living. Using the years they didn't get to help others who were fighting the same battles we fought. He paused, let his eyes move across the crowd, across faces young and old, veterans and civilians, people who understood and people who were trying to understand. 6 months ago, I was homeless, William said. Had been for 20 years. Walked 12 miles to this memorial every year and 12 miles back. Convinced I was honoring Ray. Convinced I was doing what needed to be done. But I was just surviving, just existing, just wasting the life Ray didn't get to have. Sarah squeezed his arm, encouraging, supporting. Then a teenager mocked my trembling hands, William said. Call me drunk. Call me homeless. Call me everything I had been calling myself for 20 years. And his father made him read my Medal of Honor citation, made him understand what these tremors actually represent. Brendan stood in the crowd, tears streaming down his face. Not shame tears anymore. Gratitude tears. Understanding tears. That moment changed everything, William continued. Not because I was vindicated, not because people finally knew who I was, but because it forced me to accept help, to call Dr. Vance, to enter her program, to reconnect with my sister, to stop running from the people who loved me. The crowd murmured, nodded, understood. If you're watching this, if you're struggling, if you're convinced you don't deserve help, William said. His voice strengthened, filled with conviction earned through experience. You're wrong. You deserve healing. You deserve community. You deserve to live instead of just survive. And accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave. He looked back at the wall, at Ray's name, at all the names that represented all the losses. Raychin was 19 when he died, William said. He was kind, generous, full of potential, and he wouldn't want his death to destroy me. Wouldn't want me wasting 20 years. Wouldn't want me choosing suffering over living. So I'm choosing different now. Choosing better. Choosing to honor him by helping other veterans find their way home. The applause started slowly, then built, then became thunderous. Veterans standing. Families standing. Everyone rising to honor not just William's service, but his courage in surviving afterward. His willingness to be vulnerable. His transformation from broken to healing. William stepped away from the podium, returned to Sarah, to Webb, to the people who had saved him by refusing to give up. The ceremony continued around them. More names, more families, more remembrance. But William felt different. Lighter, like the weight had finally redistributed. Like carrying the dead had transformed from punishment into purpose. Like survival had finally become something worth fighting for. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Joseph Keene approached, the old Vietnam veteran who had talked William into making that first call. They embraced, brothers separated by wars, but united by the shared experience of coming home broken and choosing to heal. You did good, Keene said. Real good. How many you think you reached today? William shook his head. Don't know. Don't matter. If one person calls for help because of what I said, if one veteran chooses healing over suffering, then it was worth it. Keene smiled. That's the right answer. That's the mission now. One veteran at a time. One conversation at a time. One life saved at a time. William looked at the wall one final time. At Ray's name. At the memorial that had defined his existence for 20 years. Still here, brother, he whispered. Still trying. But trying differently now. Trying better. Try to make your death mean something by helping others survive. And for the first time in 20 years, William Chun walked away from that wall without guilt crushing his chest. Without shame making his hands shake worse. Without the weight of failure making every step agony. He walked away toward his sister's car, toward dinner with family, toward community and purpose and the radical possibility that broken things could be rebuilt. His hands still trembled, would always tremble. The scars were permanent, but scars were just evidence of survival. Proof that damage didn't have to be destiny, that warriors could come home, that healing was possible even after decades of suffering. The sun set over Camp Pendleton, another ceremony complete, another year remembered, another November 14th marked in blood and granite and tears. But this time, William Chin drove away, not toward isolation, but toward home, toward the life Ray would have wanted him to live, toward purpose earned through pain and transformation purchased through courage. Still here, still trying, and finally, after 20 years, actually living. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that heroes exist in unexpected places and that second chances are possible, please share with others who need to hear it. Subscribe to hear more stories that honor the forgotten warriors among us. And remember, every person you pass might be carrying weight you cannot see. Choose kindness. Choose respect. Choose to look twice before judging. Thank you for watching.